Hello and welcome to another episode of Matrix Tutorials. Today we're going to learn how we can get insights on what is happening on our Synapse server with Prometheus and Grafana. Grafana is the tool plotting fancy dashboards to follow what is happening on your systems. At the end of the tutorial, you will see a dashboard like this one. It's a dashboard created by the Synapse team to display advanced metrics to take action based on the results. Grafana is just a visualization tool meant to render data in a meaningful way. It doesn't gather data by itself, it needs data sources. Prometheus is one data source frequently used to feed Grafana. It is a tool that collects and aggregates data regularly by calling HTTP endpoints. Those endpoints expose data in a format that is not JSON and looks like this. Prometheus can also support querying and alerting. You can define thresholds beyond which it will trigger an alert to bring a human's attention to a system in pain. This is out of scope for this tutorial, but we might get to it in a further episode. Synapse can be configured to expose an HTTP endpoint with a lot of data in the format Prometheus understands. Prometheus is going to call this API at the frequency we defined in its configuration, which is 15 seconds by default. It will gather the metrics exposed and store them. This allows us to see how the metrics evolve over time in Grafana, see if there are trends going on, or if we can correlate various events together. For example, detect that messages take more time to send because the database is being hammered by a specific process. Prometheus also allows us to monitor the health of the host thanks to a node exporter. It's a piece of software that gathers data and exposes it via an HTTP endpoint on the port of your choice. In this tutorial, we're only going to stick to Synapse data collection and dashboards for the sake of simplicity. But we will certainly dive into how to use Prometheus and Grafana to monitor your host in the next episode. Let me know in the comments if you're interested. So let's have a look at how to make this work in our deployment. As always, to keep things simple and accessible, we're going to build on top of the first Matrix tutorial, understanding Synapse hosting with Docker Compose. Once again, if you chose to use Ansible for your deployment, I think you will be able to translate the Docker Compose instruction into Ansible tasks. We're going to start by deploying a Prometheus container along with a volume for it so it can store its configuration file and the data it has scraped. Once Prometheus is running, we're going to make Synapse expose its metrics internally and we'll configure Prometheus to fetch them. Synapse supports exposing metrics on a different port than the regular Matrix APIs. This allows us to make the metrics accessible to Prometheus via the internal network, but not accessible via the internet. We're going to temporarily expose Prometheus on the internet to make sure everything is running smoothly before restricting it back to the internal network. To do so, we will need to add a CNAME record for it. The A record is what translates the domain name into the IP address where the server can be found. The CNAME record is a sort of redirection that will tell you if you try to resolve this domain, you need to actually resolve this other one. This is useful in case we move our infrastructure to a different server. We will only need to update the A record and all the other domains will follow automatically. The downside of it is that we need to make sure all the services are running on a single host, which is the case for us. Back to our architecture diagram, we're then going to deploy Grafana and its volume, which will expose on the internet as well. And here again, we will add a CNAME record to point grafana.example.com to example.com. Having Grafana exposed on the internet will allow us to connect to the admin UI, change the default credential of course, and configure it to use Prometheus as a data source. We'll then import the Grafana dashboards the Synapse team maintains. And finally, we're going to unexpose Prometheus from the internet. Let's spin up those containers, get them to talk to one another, and display those nice graphs. Okay, so I have a terminal ready to use because I'm really eager to get into things, but actually let's get a bit more organized. I have created this small checklist with Obsidian that is going to help me know where I am. So I need to deploy Prometheus, configure Synapse to expose the endpoints, configure Prometheus to scrape those endpoints, deploy Grafana, configure Grafana, and then import the Synapse dashboards into Grafana. This is my to-do list. I have already created the CNAME records because it wouldn't be super interesting for you, and we can get started with Prometheus. So for Prometheus, I'm actually just going to add this little snippet in my Docker Compose file. So I'm going to create a new Prometheus service. The container name is going to be Prometheus. I don't know if you remember, this is to avoid having Docker Compose create the containers with a name which is going to be infra-prometheus-1. We can give it a container name, and we are pretty confident there is not going to be any name clash because it's a single Docker Compose file, very simple in our deployment. The image is going to be from Prometheus, so this is the upstream image. I don't want to have a downstream image. And the tag I'm using is latest for the demo. As always, in my personal setups, I don't use latest tags because I would rather have the explicit version number, and I want to explicitly upgrade when I run Docker Compose. So I'm not using latest in practice, but for the sake of the demonstration, it's going to be okay. The restart policy is always the volume. So we're going to create a volume tree called Prometheus config, and it's going to be mapped to etc Prometheus inside the container, which contains the configuration file and the data that Prometheus is scraping. And then we have all those labels. Those are the labels Traefik is going to use to expose Prometheus on prometheus.chipchop.org. So if you have been following the example in the introduction, you might have prom.yourdomain.com. So let's do it. I'm going to shamelessly steal from myself, and you're going to follow me in my terminal. And I'm going to open the Docker Compose. I'm going to create a new service here. Make sure that Prometheus is indented. Whoopsie, is indented correctly. I have everything I need, except I need to create the Prometheus config volume. So there we go, Prometheus config volume. There we go. I escape the Docker Compose, and I can do Docker Compose up-d. Is going to pull the image for Prometheus, and once it's done, I'm going to have a look at the logs. So it should be running Docker logs Prometheus. There we go. Okay, seems to be okay. Let's have a look actually in a browser. So if we go to prometheus.chipchop.org, there we go. I have a Prometheus running. So that's quite encouraging. So what else do we need to do? We can check this. Prometheus is configured and exposed. We need to configure Synapse to expose the endpoint. So the Synapse manual is very well done. You can go to the usage and monitoring. I'm not going to cheat by clicking on the link I have in my notes. I'm going to do it like you. I'm going to go in a browser, and I'm going to look up Synapse configuration manual. I'll click the first link, and then in the left panel, I'm going to look for monitoring. There it is. Monitoring, so it's telling me to install Prometheus. Fantastic, this is something I have already done. I need to enable the metrics in Synapse, so in the home server YAML, the primary configuration file of Synapse. I'm going to do that, so I need to make sure I have enable matrix set to true, and then I will need to expose the endpoints. So the guide is telling me I have two ways of doing it. The first is to also expose the metrics on the regular port that Synapse is already using, which is something I'm not too fond of doing because I don't want everybody to be able to follow what is happening on my server, and I don't want to do some extra configuration in Traefik to make sure those APIs are not exposed. The alternative is to have another listener, which is what we talked about in the introduction, which is going to listen in the port 9000, and it's going to expose the metrics. So let's follow the instructions. I'm going to get back to my terminal, do some room inside it, and I'm going to varlib docker volumes, of course, infra synapse data. There we go, and I have my home server.yaml file, so I'm going to open it, look up for, what was it, enable metrics, and I don't have any match, so I'm going to add it at the bottom, enable metrics true. There we go. And then I need to go to the listeners. So I do have them. Listeners. I do have them in my file, and I'm just going to add another one. So I'm going to copy that from the documentation. Last time when I tried, I didn't copy the bind address because for some reason it was failing, and it works perfectly without that. So this is something we're going to need to change. All right, I can get back to my folder where I have Docker Compose, and I can do a Docker Compose restart Synapse and logs Synapse 1. Okay, so it's restarting Synapse, and I can see I'm checking the logs because it can be very easy to mess up the configuration file, in which case Synapse is not going to start. Okay, so Synapse seems to be functioning correctly, which is good. A simple way to see what is happening is Docker exec. So I'm going to go inside the container of Synapse, and I'm going to curl the endpoint to see if I actually have something exposed. So I'm going in my infra Synapse 1 container, and I'm going to run bin bash. And there I can do curl localhost, so HTTP, not HTTPS, because I'm inside the container. And see, yep, I have a lot of things that really look like what we should have when we expose the metrics. So I can escape the container with Control D and get back to my documentation. What does it tell me to do? Restart Synapse, that's already done, and add a Prometheus target for Synapse. So this is where we are going to tell Prometheus where to find the data. So I'm going to just copy this configuration here, job name Synapse. I'm copying that back to my terminal. There we go. So I'm going to var lib docker volumes Prometheus config data. There we go. And I have the prometheus.yaml file. So I can open this prometheus.yaml file. I can see I have several scrape config, and I have one for Prometheus at the bottom, which is targeting localhost. So I'm just going to create, there we go, another job, which is Synapse. The scrape interval is going to be this one. Oh, I have an extra space here. Okay, so it's going to scrape the API every 15 seconds. It's going to scrape this endpoint in particular. And the target, so it says my server port. So what we need to put here is Prometheus, because this is the container name, and this can actually be resolved to the actual container address because we are inside the same network. And the port was the 9000. All right, back to my directory where I have my Docker Compose file. I can do Docker Compose restart Prometheus and logs infra Prometheus 1. Oh no, it's not going to be it's going to be Prometheus because I gave it a container name, so it's restarting correctly. What we can do now is get back to the container. I'm going to go back to my Prometheus here, reload the base because you never know, and see if I have Synapse. So maybe it hasn't scraped it already. It can take a bit of time before we see it happening on the Prometheus side. Let's not worry about that too much. Where are we on the checklist? So we have configured Synapse to expose the endpoints. We have configured Prometheus to scrape those endpoints. Now we need to deploy Grafana and expose it. So to install Grafana, so same thing here. I'm going to create in my Docker Compose a Grafana service that has the container name Grafana. The image is going to be Grafana latest, same as Prometheus, really. The restart policy is also always. The only thing that changes is the volume. It's going to be mapping Grafana data to var lib Grafana. and the labels I'm going to expose on grafana.chipjob.org. So same thing here, really. I'm going to my terminal, do a bit of cleanup. I'm opening my Docker Compose file, and I had my Prometheus, so yep, just below the Prometheus, I'm going to paste the Grafana 1, and I still need the Grafana data volume. So here it is, Grafana data. There we go, and I can do a Docker Compose up-d. It's going to pull the Grafana image, and I should be able there we go. I should be able to connect my Grafana. So let's go to the browser, and we can go to grafana.chipjob.org. Oh, so I'm seeing this because Traefik didn't have the time to fetch a certificate for my Grafana yet. Just reloading the page is going to fix the issue if I'm waiting a little, because it gives Traefik a bit of time to fetch the actual certificate it needs. So the default credentials for Grafana are admin. This is obviously insecure, so you need to change them. So I set a password, and I have access to Grafana. Now, I can go to the dashboards. No, not to the dashboards. I can go to the connections, because I need to tell it that Prometheus is the data source I'm using. So in the search bar, I'm going to tell it Prometheus, and I want to create a new data source. I'm going to leave Prometheus as name, and the server URL is not going to be localhost, because localhost is from inside the container, the Grafana container. So if I'm inside the Grafana container and I go on the port 9090, I'm not going to see anything, but I'm going to call it so HTTP, because I'm inside the internal network. I'm not, I don't have any certificate here. It's going to be Prometheus 9090, and leaving everything as a default. I can save and test, and it's going to tell me I have successfully queried the Prometheus API. So that's a good news. I can get back to my Prometheus and see if I have anything. I don't have anything from Synapse. So I'm just going to go a bit nuclear and do a Docker Compose restart, because why not? So this is going to restart all the containers, and hopefully I should have all the things I need. So Prometheus is loading. Still nothing from Synapse. That's quite surprising. Is it possible that I have an issue? Where could I find that? Let's open the terminal then, and go to the lib docker volumes, infra Prometheus config, data, Prometheus.yaml. So what is happening? Could it be that it doesn't find Oh yes, this was a mistake from me. This is because I'm not looking for Prometheus, I'm looking for infra Synapse 1. Here I need to add the infra dash and the dash 1 at the end of Synapse, because the Synapse container was not named in the first tutorial, so to be consistent with it, I didn't change that. So what we are not trying to reach the Prometheus container to scrape the Synapse APIs and metrics. We are trying to actually reach Synapse, so it's not surprising. All right, so I changed that file. I'm back to the infrastructure. Docker Compose restart Prometheus. It's restarting. Let's have a look at the logs of Prometheus. Okay, no error in the logs. What if I go back to my server here? Let's reload it. Prometheus is taking some time to reload, and that's much better. I have all the Synapse metrics I need. All right. That's it. So let's get back to the notes. In Obsidian, I have deployed Grafana and exposed it, and so I configured Grafana to use Prometheus as a data source, and now I need to import the Synapse dashboard in Grafana, which I can do by following the Synapse manual. It's telling me consider using the Grafana dashboard and recording rule. So I'm going to click on Grafana dashboard. The instructions are very clear. Set Prometheus and Grafana, this is done. Have Prometheus scrape your Synapse, this is done. Import the dashboard into Grafana, so I need to download the synapse.json file and import it into Grafana. So I'm going to do that right here, clicking on the synapse.json. I'm, whoops, not forking it. I'm downloading the file, which I'm saving on my desktop. There we go. And then I can go to my Grafana. I can go in the dashboard, click on the new button and import. From here, I can find the file on my desktop, click on import. Oh, Prometheus. So, oh yes, it's going to ask me which data source I want to use. I have a single one, but I need to explicitly tell which one it is. So I'm specifying Prometheus, clicking on import, and there we go. We have quite empty dashboards, but at least everything is here. I can follow the number of monthly active users. So you can see right now I have 0 monthly active users. This is because I didn't even create a single user. I have a lot of things. I can see what's happening in the federation, the transaction rate. So this is how many requests are sent or received from the federation. We have a lot of very interesting metrics. And that's pretty much it. So we are done. We have a Prometheus that is scraping the endpoints that Synapse exposes, and we have a Grafana that is plotting fancy dashboards from that. One last thing you can do that I'm not going to cover in the tutorial is actually removing, unexposing the Prometheus from the internet. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. We can go a little further, for example, on everything monitoring the hosts with Prometheus and Grafana, if that's the sort of thing you would like to see. Please let me know in the comments what you would like to see in the next Matrix tutorials, and I'll try to find the time to make it happen. I'll see you next time. Have a nice one.